Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 1. Playing Pilgrims. Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Jo, lying on the rug. It's so dreadful to be poor, sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. I don't think it's fair some girls have lots of pretty things and other girls nothing at all, added little Amy with an injured sniff. We have father and a mother and each other, anyhow, said Beth contentedly from her corner. The four young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words, but darkened again as Jo said sadly, We haven't got father, and shall not have him for a long time. She didn't say perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away, where the fighting was. Nobody spoke for a minute. Then Meg said in an altered tone, You know, the reason Mother proposed not to have any presents this Christmas was because it's going to be a hard winter for everyone. And she thinks we ought not to spend any money for pleasure, when our men are suffering so in the army. We can't do much, but we can make our little sacrifices, and ought to do it gladly. But I'm afraid I don't. And Meg shook her head, as she thought regretfully of all the pretty things she wanted. But I don't think the little we should spend would do any good. We've each got $1, and the army wouldn't be much help by our giving that. I agree not to expect anything from Mother or you, but I do want to buy Undine and Citron for myself. I've wanted it so long, said Jo, who was a bookworm. I plan to spend mine in new music, said Beth, with a little sigh, which no one heard, but the hearth-brush and kettle-holder. I shall get a nice box of Faber's drawing pencils. I really need them, said Amy decidedly. Mother didn't say anything about our money, and she won't wish us to give up everything. Let's each buy what we want, and have a little fun. I'm sure we grow up hard enough to earn it, cried Jo, examining the heels of her boots in a gentlemanly manner. I know I do, teaching those dreadful children nearly all day, when I'm longing to enjoy myself at home, began Meg, in the complaining tone again. You don't have such a hard time as I do, said Jo. How would you like to be shut up for hours with a nervous, fussy old lady, who keeps you trotting, is never satisfied, and worries till you're ready to fly out the window or box her ears? It's naughty to fret, but I do think washing dishes and keeping things tidy is the worst work in the world. It makes me cross, and my hands get so stiff I can't practice a good bit. And Beth looked at her rough hands with a sigh that anyone could hear at that time. I don't believe any of you suffer as I do, cried Amy. For you don't have to go to school with impertinent girls who plague you if you don't go to your lessons, and laugh at your dresses, and label your father if he isn't rich, and insult you when your nose isn't nice. If you mean liberal, I'd say so. And not talk about labels as if Pa were a pickle bottle, advised Jo, laughing. I know what you mean, and you needn't be satirical about it. It's proper to use good words and improve your vocabulary, returned Amy, with dignity. Don't peck at one another, children. Don't you wish we had the money Papa lost when we were little, Jo? Dear me, how happy and good we'd be if we had no worries, said Meg, who could remember better times. You said the other day you thought we were a deal happier than the King children, for they were fighting and fretting all the time, in spite of their money. So I did, Beth. Well, I guess we are, for though we do have to work, we'll make fun of ourselves, and are a pretty jolly set, as Jo would say. Jo does use such slang words, observed Amy with a reproving look at the figure stretched on the rug. Jo immediately sat up, put her hands in her apron pockets, and began to whistle. Don't, Jo, it's so boyish. That's why I do it. I detest rude, unladylike girls. I hate affected, nimny-pinny chits. Birds in their nests agree, sang Beth, the peacemaker, with such a funny face that both sharp voices softened to a laugh, and the pecking ended for that time. Really, girls, you are both to be blamed, said Meg, beginning to lecture in her elder sisterly fashion. You were old enough to leave off boyish tricks and behave yourself better, Josephine. It didn't matter so much when you were a little girl, but now you are so tall and turn up your hair, you should remember that you are a young lady. I ain't. And if turning up my hair makes me one, I'll wear it in 2 tails till I'm 20, cried Jo, pulling off her net and shaking down a chestnut mane. I hate to think I've got to grow up and be Miss March and wear long gowns and look as prim as a China Aster. It's bad enough to be a girl anyway. I like boy games and work and manners. I can't get over my disappointment in not being a boy, and it's worse than ever now, for I'm dying to go and fight with Papa, and I can only stay at home and knit like a poky old woman. And Jo shook the blue army sock till the needles rattled like castanets, and her ball bounded across the room. Poor Jo. It's too bad, but it can't be helped, so you must try to be contented with making your name boyish, and playing brother to us girls, said Beth, stroking the rough head at her knee, with her hand that all the dishwashing and dusting in the world could not make ungentle in its touch. As for you, Amy, continued Meg, you are altogether too particular and prim. Your airs are funny now, but you'll grow up an affected little goose if you don't take care. I like your nice manners and refined ways of speaking, but when you try to be elegant, but your absurd words are as bad as Jo's slang. If Jo's a tomboy and Amy's a goose, what am I, please? Asked Beth, ready to share the lecture. You're a dear, and nothing else, answered Meg, warmly, and no one contradicted her, for Mouse was the pet of the family. As young readers like to know how people look, we will take this moment to give a little sketch of the four sisters, who sat knitting away in the twilight, while the December snow fell quietly without, and the fire crackled cheerfully within. It faded, and the furniture very plain, for a good picture, or two hung walls, books filled. That's like you, dear. What will we get? Exclaimed Jo. Everyone thought soberly for a minute. Then Meg announced, as if the idea was suggested by the sight of her own pretty hands, I shall give her a nice pair of gloves. Army shoes, best to be had, cried Jo. Some handkerchiefs, all hemmed, said Beth. I'll get her a bottle of cologne. She likes it, and it won't cost much. So I'll have some left to buy something for me, added Amy. How will we give the things? Asked Meg. Put 'em on the table and bring her in, and see her open the bundles. Don't you remember how we used to do on our birthdays? Answered Jo. I used to be frightened when it was my turn to sit in the big chair with a crown on, and see you all coming marching round to give me presents with a kiss. I liked the things and the kisses, but it was dreadful to have you look at me while I opened the bundles, said Beth, who was toasting her face and the bread for tea at the same time. Let Mommy think we're getting her things for ourselves, and then surprise her. We must go shopping tomorrow afternoon, Beth. There's lots to do about the play for Christmas night, said Jo, marching up and down with her hands behind her back and nose in the air. I don't mean to act any more this time. I'm getting too old for such things, observed Meggs, who was as much as a child as ever about dressing up frolics. You won't stop, I know, as long as you can trail around in a white gown with your hair down and wear a golden paper jewellery. You are the best actress we've got, and there'll be an end of everything if you quit the boards, said Jo. We ought to rehearse tonight. Come here, Amy, and do the fainting scene, for you are as stiff as a poker in that. I can't help it. I've never seen anyone faint, and I don't choose to make myself all black and blue, tumbling flat as you do. If I can go down easily, I'll drop. If I can't, I shall fall into a chair and be graceful. I don't care if Hugo does come at me with a pistol, returned Amy, who was not gifted with dramatic power, but was chosen because she was small enough to be borne out of shrieking by a hero of the piece. Do it this way. Clasp your hands so and stagger across the room, crying frantically, Rodrigo! Save me! Save me! And away went Jo, with a melodramatic scream, which was truly thrilling. Amy followed, but she poked her hands out stiffly before her, and jerked herself along, as if she went by machinery, and her "Ow!" was more suggestive of pins being run over into her fan of fear than anguish. Jo gave a desperating groan, and Meg laughed outright, while Beth let her bread burn as she watched the fun with interest. It's no use, Do the best you can with all the time it comes, and if the audience shout, don't blame me. Come on, Meg." Then things went smoothly, for Dom Pedro divined the word into speech of 2 pages without a single break. Hagar the witch chanted an awful incantation over her kettle full of simmering toads, with a weird effect. Rodrigo sent his chains asunder manfully, and Hugo died in agonies of remorse and arsenic, with a wild "Ha ha!" "It's best we've had yet," said Meg, as the dead villain sat up and rubbed his elbows. "I don't see how you can write and act such splendid things, Joe. You're a regular Shakespeare," examined Beth, who firmly believed that her sisters were gifted with wonderful genius of all things. "Not quite," replied Joe modestly. "I do think The Witch is Cursed, an operatic tragedy, is a rather nice thing, but I'd like to try Macbeth, if we only had a trapdoor for Banquo. I've always wanted to do the killing part." "Is that a dagger I see before me?" muttered Joe, rolling her eyes and clutching at the air, as she'd seen a famous tragedian do. "No, it's a toasting fork, with Ma's shoe on it, instead of the bread. Best stage struck," cried Meg, and the rehearsal ended in a general burst of laughter. "Glad to find you so merry, my girls," said a cheery voice at the door, and actors and audience turned to welcome a stout, motherly lady, with a "Can I help you?" look about the witch was truly delightful. She wasn't a particularly handsome person, but mothers are always lovely to their children, and the girls thought the grey cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered in most splendid woman in the world. "Well, dearies, how have you got on today?" "There was so much to do getting the boxes ready to go tomorrow, and that I didn't have to come home to dinner. Has anyone called Beth? How is your cold, Meg? Joe, you look tired to death. Come and kiss me, baby." While making these maternal inquiries, the March got her wet things off, her hot slippers on, and sitting down in the easy chair drew Amy to her lap, preparing to enjoy the happy hour of her busy day. The girls flew about, trying to make things comfortable, each in her own way. Meg arranged the tea table. Joe brought wood and set chairs, dropping over, tuning and clattering everything she touched. Meg trotted off to and fro between parlour and kitchen, quiet and busy, while Amy gave directions to everyone, as she sat with her hands folded. As they gathered about the table, Mrs. March said, with a particularly happy face, "I've got a treat for you after supper." A quick bright smile went round a streak of sunshine. Beth clapped her hands, regardless of the hot biscuit she held, and Joe tossed up a napkin, crying, "A letter! A letter! 3 cheers for Father!" "Yes, a nice long letter. He's well, and thinks he shall get through the cold season better than we feared. He sends all sorts of loving wishes for Christmas, and an especial message to you girls," said Mrs. March, patting her pocket as if she had got a treasure there. "Hurry up and get it done. Don't start to quirk your little finger and prick over your plate, Amy," cried Joe, choking at her tea and dropping her bread, butter side down, on the carpet, in her haste to get at the tray. Beth ate no more, but crept away to sit in her shadowy corner and brood over the delight to come, till the others were ready. "I think it was so splendid in Father to go as a chaplain when he's too old to be tried." Beth said nothing, but wiped away her tears with the blue army sock, and began to knit with all her might, losing no time in doing the duty that lay nearest to her, while she resolved in her quiet little soul to be all that Father hoped to find her when the year brought round happy coming home. Miss March broke the silence that followed Joe's words by saying in her cheery voice, "Do you remember how you used to pay Pilgrim's Progress when you were little things? Nothing delighted you more than to have me tie my piece bags on your backs for burdens, give you hats and sticks and rolls of paper, and let you travel through the house from the cellar, which was the city of destruction, up to the housetop, where you had all those lovely things you could connect to make a celestial city. What fun it was, especially going by the lions, fighting Apollyon, and passing through the valley where the hobgoblins were," said Joe. "I liked the place where the bundles fell off and tumbled down the stairs," said Meg. "My favourite part was when we all came out the flat roof and where our flowers and arbours and pretty things were, and all stood up and sung for joy, up there in the sunshine," said Beth, smiling as if that pleasant moment hadn't come back to her. "I don't remember much about it, except that I was afraid of the cellar and the dark entry, and always liked the cake and milk we had up at the top. If I wasn't too old for such things, I'd rather like to play it over again," said Amy, who began to talk of renouncing childish things at the mature age of 12. We are never too old for this, my dear, because this is play. We are playing all the time, in one way or another. Our burdens are here, our road is before us, and the longing of goodness and happiness is a guide that leads us through many troubles and mistakes to the peace where is a true celestial city. Now, my little pilgrims, I suppose you begin again, not in play, but in earnest, to see how far on you not to play can get before father comes home. "Really, mother? Where are our bundles?" asked Amy, who was a very literal young lady. "Each of you told what your burden was just now, except Beth." "I'd rather think she hasn't got any," said her mother. "Yes, I have. Mine is dishes and dusters and envying girls with nice pianos, and being afraid of people. Beth's bundle was such a funny one that everybody wanted to laugh, but nobody did, for it would have hurt her feelings very much." "Let us do it," said Meg thoughtfully. "It's only another name for us trying to be good, and the story may help us, as though we do want to be good. It's hard work, and we forget, and don't do our best. We're in the Slough of Despond tonight, and Mother came and pulled us out as Help did in the book. We ought to have rolls of directions like Christians." "What shall we do about that?" asked Jo, delighted with the fancy which lent a little romance to the very dull task of doing her duty. "Look under your pillows, Christmas morning, and you will find your guidebook," replied Mrs. March. They talked over the new plan while old Hannah cleared the table, and then came to the 4 little work baskets, and the needles flew as the girls made their sheets for Aunt March. It was an uninteresting sewing, but tonight no one grumbled. They adopted Jo's plan for dividing the long sleeves into 4 parts, calling the quarters Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, and in that way got on capitality, especially when they talked about the different countries as they stitched their way through them. At 9 they stopped work and sung, as usual, before they went to bed. No one but Beth could get as much music out of the old piano, but she had a way of softly touching the yellow keys and making a pleasant accompaniment for the simple songs they sung. Meg had a voice like a flute, and she and her mother led the little choir. Amy chirped like a cricket, and Jo wandered through the airs at her own sweet will, always coming out of the wrong place, with a croak or a quaver that spoiled most of the pensive tune. They had always done this from the time they could lisp. Crinkle, crinkle, it'll tar. And it had become a household custom, for the mother was born a singer. The first sound in the morning was her voice, as she went about the house singing like a lark, and the last sound at night was the same cheery sound, for the girls never grew too old for that familiar lullaby.